Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. And today, your Bish is coming at you solo. I realized when I was prepping for season 3 that all of my episodes have been interviews. And that is a stark contrast from what I normally do. And so I want to say, number one, I'm happy to talk to you all again solo. Heard your feedback. I got some feedback from some folks that, while people love the episodes with guests and things like that, there were some people that were just missing solo episodes, and I hear you and I feel you, and here we are. So today, Yabish is going to be giving you some personal updates from my trip over the summer to my health and, some other stuff that I have been posting about on social media. But more importantly, what I'm going to talk about today is Real Housewives of Orange County and Jax, aka Jason Couchy. So while I've been doing all these interviews, there's been a lot going on in the Bravo sphere regarding mental health. And it's just never been a better time for me to be in this space because, for example, when Jax posted about his diagnosis, I just didn't hear, I heard about the announcement, but I didn't hear a lot about, more about that. And then I thought, well, I'm the one that needs to talk more about that, right? Isn't that what I'm here to do? So I did a little Instagram post about, bipolar disorder and PTSD because there's many kinds. And, so I just wanted to give my thoughts on all of that. And of course, going to cover Real Housewives of Orange County. And I also want to hear from you all. Do you want more solo episodes? Do you, is there a particular guest that you would love for me to have on? I am talking to several people behind the scenes, interesting people that I think you all would like, but, sometimes I just never know. So for me, just to be really clear, this podcast is just experimentation. It's me getting to live out a creative process that I never really tapped into, doing what I was doing as a therapist. Like I was creative, but it's just a whole different part of my brain I'm unlocking here. So, a lot of what this is trial and error, and I appreciate your patience and I appreciate your loyalty and I appreciate your love and support. I get so many nice messages from listeners and I'm always blown away. So thank you to you all. I know I haven't been able to say this to you directly in a while. I've done so many interviews, but I appreciate you. I love this community and I'm glad to be back solo. So let me start off by giving you some personal updates. So between season 2 and season 3, I took a 6-week break that felt like it was about 6 minutes, 6 minutes long. For multiple reasons. So I did talk a little bit about this on my Spreaker Supporters Club. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a club for people to support me. It's $5 a month, and the links to everything are in my bio and Instagram and my link tree, all that. You can also find that on Facebook and on TikTok. But anyway, I, got all new equipment over the break. And it was really not great. I have all this beautiful equipment here. Now I'm learning how to use it. But what I had to realize is that when I started doing this podcast, I had no idea the complexities that go into making a podcast, especially when you're doing it by yourself. People think it's really easy. I guess I was one of those people. And initially, I had a great setup. It was just it was like a non-expensive set of headphone and microphone, and it just plugged into my computer and everything worked seamlessly. And so I got all this new equipment at Guitar Center. I got the Shure microphone and a Scarlett Solo. I don't even know what you call it, interface, I guess. And, so the first half of my break, well, all of my break in the first half of the season was just trying to figure out how to utilize this new equipment. And so I want to share some insights that I got from that because, for me, when I'm having a hard time and my brain gets hijacked, I know that will resonate with people. So there was a period of a couple of weeks where I just was in the weeds and I was so upset because I'm like, I don't know how to work this equipment. I don't know what business I think I had doing this. And, I was really down on myself. I was really frustrated. I released a couple of episodes about Spreaker support to Spreaker Supporters Club, which, by the way, that's why I brought that up, is that if you ever want extra content or episodes, you can check that out. But anyway, so I had a couple of events where I recorded episodes that were an hour long, and then the audio got corrupted and it was like an issue with my computer. It was just, it was just one thing after another. But what I learned is that avoiding learning a new skill isn't the solution to growth. So sometimes growth requires us to do things that are way out of our comfort zone, that are so beyond what we know and are comfortable with. So for example, this podcast, I'm great at the content. I could do content every day. I could have an everyday show if I had a producer and all this other stuff. The hardest part is, the editing and the audio engineering. And, basically I'm a podcaster. I'm a social media manager. I'm a tech equipment manager, which, by the way, I had to remind myself too, there are people who go to school to learn this, like school to learn, like audio engineering and tech and stuff like that. And so I look back and I laugh at myself to think, how silly it was to think that I could just effortlessly, I guess what I'm saying is my expectations of myself are wild. And I know for people listening to this that will resonate. So that's why I want to share it, is that sometimes we are so hard on ourselves and it is just unnecessary because, I've talked to people who listen to the podcast and like, aside from one or two audio issues that were just noticeable because I didn't know how to fix them then, but by the way, I know how to fix them now, I'm doing all right. I'm doing great. So I think that, this is a message from me to you is like, we're doing better than we think we are. And sometimes when we're in the weeds with stuff, it makes us feel, all sorts of different ways. But my point is that I'm just so grateful that I was able to shake myself out of that and to say, listen, Melissa, get it together, lady. You are smart. You are competent. We can do this. Let's have grace with ourselves and figure it out. And so that's essentially what I've done. And for the times where I can't figure it out, I have resources online. Thank you to Ryan Bailey and Mandy Slutzker, who helped me get to some AI audio engineering that is super helpful that I can just do myself. Because I am looking for help. So I am actively looking for someone to help me. Until that happens, I want to, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And I know you all appreciate it. And I'm grateful that I was able to get the lesson in this all, that avoidance of doing something new or different isn't healthy. So as hard and as scary as it is to do something new and different that maybe you're not super comfortable with, and as a recovering perfectionist, this was a nightmare for me that brought out all sorts of, I had all these blind spots that I just didn't know about. I had worked in therapy so hard the last couple of years to work through so much trauma, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I worked. And when I started this podcast, I thought I had done the work I had to do. And so what the podcast afforded me, at the moment I didn't see it, but was opportunities to look at the blind spots that I still had, insecurities, where my brain would get hijacked, anxiety, perfectionism, all this other stuff. And, a lot of folks, when we're not sure of something, we want to avoid that, myself included. I'm human just like everybody else. As evidenced by my being a brand ambassador for I Am Human thebrand.com, which I'm super excited about. I'll just plug that quick. But I'm human, you're human, we're all human. And with that comes pain and hardship. But if we can get through that, if we can have strong roots and withstand those storms, when the storm passes, we can be stronger than ever and more insightful and more aware. And so I am now aware of what some of these blind spots in my healing were. I'm not going to be super specific about that today just because I'm still processing a lot of it. And so once I have a little bit more clarity and time and space from it, I will certainly be happy to share my experience and strength and hope with you all. I can say right now that I am back to being happy and healthy and balanced. And I'm just super grateful, for you all. I'm super grateful for me and my tenacity and my resilience because I just quite literally never give up. Sometimes I feel like I want to, or I feel like, oh gosh, I'm never going to get through this, but that's just not true. So, again, this is not super comfortable for me to always talk about, but I know that you all appreciate it. And, I know that this will resonate with you all. So if there is something, a new challenge that you're facing, new skills that you're trying to learn, please hear this and know that you got this. And, normally I think that's like a toxic positivity saying, but when I say you got this, that means like we are capable of more than we give ourselves credit for. And you got this means you can get through it. It may look really messy and not look pretty at all, but we're all going to get through the things that we're dealing with right now. And everyone listening to this has different levels of things. And so, I always say comparison is like the thief of joy. So it's not good to compare. Everyone's situations are different, but everyone listening to this right now is dealing with something. So I send you love, I send you support, and I'm thankful for your support because honestly, that's what helps get me through. I'm not joking. I get nasty messages too, but I've really learned in this space to just to ignore that and disregard it because people are always going to dislike me. And that's fine. Honestly, I'm not even mad about that. I understand I'm not for everybody, and that is more than acceptable. But what's not acceptable is, when I get messages from people that are rude or nasty or trying to tell me what I need to do on my show. And so, I know that sometimes they say that ignorant voices are the loudest. And so what I can say is that I am grateful for all the lovely people who, by the way, I love feedback. And there are so many of you who give me feedback in the most lovely ways. Like, for example, someone gave me feedback about, missing my solo episodes, and it was lovely and it was respectful and appropriate. And I was like, yeah, you know what? That totally makes sense. And so I'm doing a solo episode and I'm, talking about that. But when people, send me messages threatening me, which, yes, that happens, or, all this other wild stuff, I've learned, even in that, there's learning and there's gifts in that. And the gift in that is I am learning to put blinders on and focus on the stuff that requires and deserves my focus, which is you all and my podcast and me and, my social media. And I just, it's wild to me, the concept of, I've listened to a ton of podcasts over the years. Unfortunately, now I don't get to listen to them as much because doing mine and it's so much work, I hardly get to listen to anything. But I have never once heard a podcast and was like, you know what, I need to let this person know that I don't like what it is they're doing. I've never done that. I just move along. But not everyone is like me. And some people feel entitled to let me know that something I'm doing is upsetting them. And, honestly, I get that. It would be nice if I was the problem for those people, right? If I was the problem, then that could be easily fixed by either ignoring me or complaining or whatever. But the problem is when people are unhappy and they do these things, they want everybody else to be their problem instead of looking at maybe the role that they play in things. So my long rambling point of this all is that I am learning how to block out the noise that's always going to be there, the people that really dislike me and want to threaten me or want to, hurt me or whatever. I'm tuning that out completely, and I'm just enjoying this for what it is. I'm trying to enjoy social media, which is always harder, and I don't know if I'll ever get there because personally I feel like Instagram, I have like a unhealthy relationship with because long story short, I had posted 2 comments about advocating for basic human rights. Okay. And I'm not even going to be specific because it doesn't matter. Basic human rights, me advocating for basic human rights. And I was shadow banned twice. That's right. 2 times I was shadow banned for advocating for human rights when I see some of the comments out there and I see some of the things that are able to be posted, and it's a gross system. Meta is gross. And I hate being attached to it. So I'm just trying to figure that all out too. I'm not going anywhere. Have my following on Instagram is growing. But it's like with my complex PTSD, Instagram for me can be a little triggering in terms of like, I'm not doing anything wrong, yet I'm getting punished for that. And how do I know I'm getting punished is that people who subscribe to me on Instagram, so there are people who are subscribers, I think it's $5 a month or something like that, and they get, badges and extra content and, et cetera. So people who are subscribing to me when I'm shadow banned aren't even seeing my page. That's absurd. Not only is it absurd, it's unfair, it doesn't make any sense. And also, like, why would Instagram want to do that? Because then people aren't seeing my content and then I'm not getting paid, which means they're not getting paid. I just don't understand it. And so it does trigger a lot of my stuff of why am I being punished for something that I'm not doing, and, all that other stuff. So my long rambling point in all of this is just that I can assure you that I am good. I am happy. I am navigating all of this better than I could have even expected. And I'm just super grateful to be here and to be sharing this with you. So let me move on to my trip to Chicago. So I wanted initially to do a listener meetup in Illinois. And by the way, so I'm from Downers Grove, Illinois, born and raised. I was born there and then raised there until I was 17. And then my dad moved us to Hazleton, Pennsylvania. But so growing up there, I have a lot of family. My mom has a big family, lots of aunts, uncles, cousins. And I have friends there that, I've had since kindergarten. Shout out to Linda and Melissa. And if y'all are listening to this, I love you. But so I legitimately have so much family support. I have lots of friends out there. And I just love everything about it. I love a suburb. I love the city. I just love Chicago. It's like in my bones. I just love everything about it. So going there was super fun. And I realized that while I wanted to do a listener meetup, because I do have a lot of Midwest listeners that are close to the Chicagoland area, I just was so exhausted. I needed a break. And so I appreciate people who understood that, because I'm sure it was disappointing to some folks. And I do want to do listener meetups, and I do want to do live shows. I do have plans to do all those things. I just always have to, I'm putting myself first in that if health stuff crops up, or mental health stuff, physical health, mental health, whatever stuff is cropping up, I have to do my best to manage that. And so I'm learning how to balance, right? How to balance meeting your needs, meeting my needs, and putting on a great show. And so I took that break. I got a lot of TLC and had lots of fun and laughs, and it was wonderful. And then when we came back, I started the podcast again for season 3. I've done a lot of good episodes of that. And then I did have a little, I'll just give you a little health update. So as you all know, I'm managing chronic lymphocytic leukemia. I've been on treatment for that now for 5 years, which is like, blech. And over the summer, I had a scare, which essentially was that someone at the lab miscalculated my numbers. And so when you think like, how could that be possible? We're talking blood tests and numbers that are extremely complex, that it takes truly an expert. Like my specialist will be able to just like do all the physics and the calculations and all of this. And, that's why it's good when you have certain diagnoses that are complicated. I'm not a typical CLL patient. Typical CLL patients are older and they may never need treatment. I am not a typical CLL patient. I'm young. It's been more aggressive than normal. And the good news is that so things have been stable, and the blood test initially showed that things were not good. And that put me in a mental headspace that was really scary. I was having night terrors. I mean, my life has been threatened, on multiple occasions. My first cancer, I was 17, and doctors told me that I wouldn't survive. They told my family I wouldn't survive. I mean, it was crazy. There were hospitals that wouldn't even agree to treat me. And so when your life has legitimately been threatened, the subconscious, the unconscious, it acts out. And I had the craziest night terrors, and it was so hard. And then I come to realize that while the numbers have increased slightly, which is not great, it's slight and certainly not what we thought it was because of the incorrect calculation. So, what did your Bish learn from this? I will tell you. I have appointments every 3 months with my oncologist, both local and my one at Penn. And I learned that for me, when you live with a disease like this, a cancer that's like a forever type of thing, and, it's like you really have to learn, I really had to learn that I needed to take space from my blood counts. Like, everything that I do in my life really is to try to maintain some sense of control, right? When you have lived with trauma, you have a chronic cancer, and, my body is sometimes a little bit of a nightmare. And so there's all these things that I've done to try to control things that I can't control, including what I put into my body and what I don't put into my body, including, there's a lot of other examples of that. But what I've learned is that true happiness lies in radical acceptance that I have no control over anything. I have no control over my body. I have no control over people on the internet. I have no control over when I'm triggered and my brain gets hijacked for a minute. Now I can control how I deal with that. But so what I'm telling you all is that I realized is that I needed to have radical acceptance that I cannot control things, and I just needed to let it all go. My whole life, I've been trying to furiously hold on to things, the facade of control. And I quit that. I was like, this is causing me too much pain. I clearly can't control this. I give up. And so part of that was super healing in that what I'm giving up is overthinking about my CLL or my health issues. Not doing that anymore. I'm also giving up looking at my blood test results prior to the appointment. The whole point of having the appointment is to have my specialist tell me, here's where you're at and here's what we're going to do. Or here's where you're at and we're going to stay in a holding pattern, whatever it is. And me looking at my blood tests was me trying to control the narrative and control what they were going to say and control. And so I just gave it up. And I've been deliriously happy ever since. Now people are going to ask, how did you do that? Honestly, I was tired of the pain. My therapist, and this is the last thing I'm going to say before I move on, because I don't want to spend this whole episode talking about me. I mean, I know people want to hear some of it, but listen, we got to move on. My therapist suggested last year that I don't look at blood test results because this is not the first time either things have been wrong or I have been sent spinning because of blood test results. That ended up being not a huge deal. Or if it was a huge deal, it was addressed, what have you. And, I finally said to her last month, I was like, yeah, you were right. I just didn't want to let go, and I need to let go, and I'm not going to look at them. And so fellow cancer thrivers, survivors, people with chronic illness listening to this are either oh my God, how is that possible? Or yeah, I had to do that too. For the people who are like, oh my God, how's that possible? Last year, it felt impossible for me to not look at blood test results. That felt impossible. I was literally refusing to give up that control. So for me, the pain, the consistent pain and the consistent torture of, oh my gosh, like for a week being like, what's going on with my health? What's my doctor going to say? Having night terrors, like that's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. So I am just super grateful to, I don't know, be where I am right now and to just say, listen, I appreciate the lessons that I'm learning. Would I appreciate a few less sometimes? Yep. But that's not up to me. That's not up to me. Sometimes I think the universe, I'm like, okay, I get it. I've had all the lessons and the universe is just like, no, you haven't. And it's like, I haven't, just because life is hard for many of us listening to this. I know there's a lot of folks listening to this who have had a harder life than most. But what I have to remind myself is that for me, I'm not special in that. Life is hard. No one ever said it would be fair. I certainly sometimes feel like I've had more than my fair share. But again, what does that even mean? And it just is. So if I stay in the self-pity and the why, that's just not healthy for me. No judgment to anyone who's there right now, because guess what? I was there before. And I'm just realized that I care more about my peace and sanity. And so I'm giving up the ghost of control. I am giving it up. And it feels great. I'm not joking. It actually feels really wonderful. Now, one thing I'll be clear about is that giving up, radical acceptance and giving up control, it's a continuous process and it's not linear, it's cyclical. So there are some days where I might wake up and be like, no, I'm in self-pity and I refuse to accept this. But instead of that being my mindset forever, that might be it for a day or two. And then I can come back to, okay, I was having a day. So I think that's just the other reason I share this is that healing is not linear. It is cyclical. It is bumpy. It's messy. It's, you can think that you are there and then something crops up and you're like, oh, dang, I am not there. So my point is we're all in good company. Welcome. And this is why we need each other, because it's really hard to understand it unless you've lived it. Admittedly, as a therapist, I've always had complex PTSD, but I just didn't know it and it wasn't diagnosed and it wasn't being treated. And so there were ways that I would act out and I didn't understand where it was coming from. And so I think that we can only do better once we know better. And so this leads me to talking a little bit about Jax, is that, sometimes people, we want to be healed so bad that we just fake it, or we pretend, we use half measures, crystals, blah, blah, blah. And listen, all that stuff is great in addition to real, true mental health treatment, whatever that looks like for you. That's not therapy for everyone. So I want to be clear, there's not just one way. But, so Jax talked about, he gave a quote and I'll share it. He said, a little over a month ago, I checked into an intensive inpatient treatment facility, scared of the unknown and what I would find out about myself. After many years of knowing something was wrong, but not knowing exactly what it was, I learned that I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and PTSD. And so, as someone I've worked in intensive inpatient treatment facilities before, and so I have an understanding of what that is, and then I have an understanding of what these diagnoses are. And what I really wanted to share is that there's different types of bipolar disorder and there's different types of PTSD. And so I appreciate that Jax is being vague. Hopefully he and his therapist understand the nuances of these disorders, and hopefully he has more specific information because those are very vague diagnoses. And really, here's the thing. A diagnosis, the only reason it's important is A, for insurance purposes, because, insurance is a nightmare and that's just the world we live in, and they're not going to pay for something that doesn't have a label. And number two, it is a label, but I reframe it as it's a helpful label to be able to develop a treatment plan, right? So for example, if you go to the doctor and they're like, you have cancer, and it's like, okay, great. Well, what kind? They're like, it's just cancer. It's like, well, that we need to know more so it can inform my treatment plan, because there's a million different types of treatments. Same thing for mental health. It's not, I'm comparing apples and oranges, but I'm just using as an example that a lot of times people look at a diagnosis as, on inappropriate labeling, but to me, it just helps inform that treatment plan. So hopefully he and his therapist are aware of that, because depending on what he's dealing with, it requires a different treatment plan. So I want to talk a little bit about the different types of bipolar disorder. And I want to go back to a point I was making before, is that before I knew that I had complex post-traumatic stress disorder, as a therapist, I was trauma informed, right? I was always a trauma informed therapist through training, through experience, and I used my experience and my training to understand these issues and to work on them. And I was very successful, and people, really, even to this day, I get messages, will you see me for therapy? And unfortunately, I'm not practicing right now, just because I with my health, I just can't, because that requires consistency, and I can't be right now. Which sucks, and I had to accept that too. So, but anyway, my point is that people who have these disorders are the experts, in my opinion. There's a part of my knowledge of CPTSD that became more informed once I started working on that diagnosis and understanding and gaining insight. And so for me, what people do love about me is I'm a patient and I'm a professional, and I'm great at both. And so I now have a full understanding of post-traumatic stress disorder in ways that, I'm going to be honest, I didn't have before. And so, listen, that doesn't mean, a therapist doesn't have to have your same issue to be good at what they do, right? Like a heart surgeon doesn't have to have heart issues or what have you. But there is a level of understanding that changes when you have personal experience with something and professional experience with it. I'll say that. So my message, though, to empower folks listening to this is that you're living with us, you're the expert. And there are times that I've been to doctors that I'm telling them more about something that I have than they know. And I'm like, this is not right. You should know more about this than I do. But here's the thing. Not all healthcare practitioners are created equal. They're just not, just like people, right? Some people are amazing. Some people suck. So, and then there's a spectrum. And so healthcare people, it's going to be the same. My message is, don't give up just because you have been hurt before. So for example, Jax, he talked about the therapist who he talked about this on a podcast, that when he was on Vanderpump Rules, he was super hesitant to get therapy. He did get therapy, and then the therapist did something beyond unethical and disgusting, which was like talk about his stuff to his friends. And I'm not exactly sure what happened, but he claims that, this is the reason why I was so adverse to therapy for years. And so my message here is like, yeah, I'm not going to lie. That therapist, number one, should lose their license and completely be unable to practice, because that is disgusting. And as a therapist, I take therapy. It's so sacred to me. It's so sacred and it's so special. And that person is a disgusting person who needs to not be practicing. And by the way, Jax had every right to feel extremely distressed about that. And he had every right to be hesitant about seeking therapy. However, that being said, we do a great disservice to ourselves when we let people who hurt us prevent us from accessing the help that we need. For example, I've been diagnosed with cancer twice, and both times before I was diagnosed, I saw medical quote unquote professionals who told me that I was a crazy hypochondriac and I should just enjoy my life. I'm not joking. Both times. Okay. And the first time it actually almost killed me. So when you have an experience where you are trusting that someone is going to help you and then they weaponize that or gaslight you, whatever it is, that for sure is painful. But what was I going to do? Just give up and die? No. So my point is that there are healthcare professionals in this world that are terrible and are damaging and are going to hurt us. But unfortunately, it's a disservice to us if we then don't advocate for ourselves elsewhere to get our needs met elsewhere, right? And so it's a classic thing of two things can be true, in my opinion. And, listen, what I will say about Jax is that I was never a fan of Jax. I said this 1 million times. I feel that, in fact, I never really watched VPR because I had such an allergic reaction to Jax, and there's many reasons for that. Mostly because of these issues that he's having that I could sense were there and he's not acknowledging that they are. That just, as a viewer, didn't make me feel safe. And that's because of my history, right? And so I just think that for him, there's growth in saying, okay, well, here's why I didn't get help sooner. Here's what I'm going to do now to change that. And even though I've never been a fan of Jax, he deserves happiness, health, and healing. And I wish nothing but the best for him, truly. So let me get into, there's 3 diagnoses of bipolar disorder, and then there's 5 for PTSD. So I'm just going to share those a little bit. First, so there's bipolar 1, bipolar 2, and cyclothymic disorder. Bipolar 1 disorder is diagnosed when a person experiences a manic episode. During a manic episode, people with bipolar 1 disorder experience an extreme increase in energy and mood changes, including feeling extremely happy or uncomfortably irritable. Some people with bipolar 1 disorder also experience depressive or hypomanic episodes, which a hypomanic episode is like a manic episode is really, really extreme and severe, and hypomanic is like a smaller version of that. So mania, but less severe, essentially. And most people with bipolar 1 disorder also have periods of neutral mood. So it's a kind of a fallacy that with bipolar disorder, it's always ups and downs. No, they do have periods of neutral mood as well. And one thing I want to say about this is that males are definitely more prone to rage and anger due to the societal stigma surrounding men's mental health. So for women, it's like more acceptable societally, I guess, for us to cry. And for men, it's like they feel more comfortable getting angry and punching things and acting like a total douche. And that truly is due to societal stigma around men's mental health. Men need to cry. Men's mental health matters too. Jax's mental health matters. So I just wanted to be like super clear about that. And part of vulnerability, even for me, I'm going to be honest, like I had a clinical problem with crying. And again, that's rooted in childhood trauma. But learning how to just like cry and just like not be mad at myself or feel uncomfortable with it. Like there's such vulnerability in learning to cry, if I'm being honest. And that's something I'm continually working on. So that's bipolar 1 disorder. Bipolar 2 disorder must have one major depressive episode and at least one hypomanic episode. With bipolar 2, it is common that people return to their usual functioning between episodes. People with bipolar 2 disorder often first seek treatment as a result of their depressive episodes, since the hypomanic episodes often feel pleasurable and can even increase performance at work or school. So this can look like someone being like, oh, I just thought I was depressed and now I just like had a little bit more energy than usual. So people with bipolar 2 disorder frequently have other mental health issues such as anxiety disorder or substance use disorder, and which can exacerbate symptoms of depression and hypomania if there is substances involved here, which people are talking a lot about that with Jax. I'm not even going to speculate because to me that's unethical, completely inappropriate. And that's between he and his provider. It's just a note that if there is a lot of folks with these mental health disorders do self-medicate to try to self-regulate or to try to not feel the pain, things like that. And so it's, again, I share this because these diagnoses and disorders, it's not just black and white. There are so many shades of gray that often gets missed, like in popular culture. So the third type of bipolar disorder is called cyclothymic disorder, and it's a milder form of bipolar disorder and may involve quote unquote mood swings. So hypomania and depressive symptoms that occur, but people with cyclothymia experience emotional ups and downs with less severity than bipolar 1 or bipolar 2. Now, treatment for bipolar disorder varies. Like I always say, individuals are like snowflakes and everyone requires their own solution, but research suggests that psychotropic medication and psychotherapy are effective treatments. Now, talk therapy for some people is helpful. For some people with certain personality disorders, it is less helpful. For some people with trauma, EMDR is helpful. For some people, so it's so different. So when I say psychotherapy, that means a broad type of therapies. Okay, now let's go on to PTSD. First type of PTSD is acute stress disorder. So similar to PTSD, it can develop following a traumatic event and symptoms start between 3 days and 1 month after the event. Number 2 is dissociative PTSD, which was added to the DSM-5 in 2013. And features dissociative symptoms, including depersonalization or derealization and emotional attachment. And all that means is basically, all that means is that some folks, myself included, I will be honest here, is that some PTSD includes feeling completely detached and like you're kind of floating above yourself, things like that. I do experience that as well. And it can be very scary, and it can really make you feel like there's something really wrong with you. And I'm here to say there's not. This is just how our brains and bodies have protected us with the trauma that we've gone through. So I just want to, shout that out for people listening to this is that, we're not broken. We're just, we're learning and growing, and it's just, we're amazing. So I just want you to know that. 3 is uncomplicated PTSD. So this is, people with this have similar symptoms to other types of PTSD, but the main difference is that PTSD does not coexist with other mental health conditions. Like this type of uncomplicated PTSD does not occur with other mental health conditions like anxiety disorders, substance use disorders, something like that. So that is called uncomplicated PTSD. The fourth type, which I have spent a lot of time talking about, this is what I'm diagnosed with. It's called complex PTSD, caused by repeated or multiple traumas that happen over a period of months or even years instead of a traumatic event that happens once and is over. So complex PTSD can present through physical health symptoms. Hello, me. I am a literal poster child for complex PTSD. And so fatigue and chronic pain and all these other things are very common because my nervous system has been smoldering and dysregulated for probably 40 years. And while I've been working on healing for the last 4, it's, it takes, if it takes a long time, if it takes 40 years to get you this way, it's going to take time to get you, back to a healthier place. Because the thing with complex PTSD too, that most people don't realize, it's like, it's not just the bad stuff that did happen, it's the good stuff that didn't happen. And I just want to repeat that. It's also the good stuff that should have happened that didn't. And that's as much a part of the problem. So because of all of that, treatment for this type of PTSD, often takes longer, and recovery often happens at much slower rates. And I can tell you, as someone who's I've had weekly therapy every week for almost 4 years, and I don't miss. If I can't go, I do telehealth, and I'm telling you, I've worked so hard, and it's still like when I started having all these issues with the, my podcast and the tech stuff, it triggered all that same stuff. And I was like, oh, great. Lots more work to do. But, one thing I'm going to say about this is just that some people die never having healed or understanding what is going on for them. And so I feel that to understand it at any point in your life and to work on it at any point is such a win. it's just such a win. So I just want to remind everyone of that. And the fifth one is comorbid PTSD. So individuals have 1+ co-occurring mental health conditions. So for example, anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, or substance use disorder, that goes together with the PTSD. And I do want to say, so there was a book I read called An Unquiet Mind. So for people who have bipolar disorder, especially bipolar 1, there's a book by K. Redfield James. I always get that middle part wrong, but it is definitely called An Unquiet Mind. And it is a brilliant depiction of what this woman experienced with bipolar 1 disorder. And it is eye-opening, and it is, I read it so many years ago, and it's a book I've reread. And so for people who are either struggling with bipolar disorder or want to learn more about it, or, this book, An Unquiet Mind, is just, it's a wonderful book to talk about that. So that's my spiel on all of that, and sending love to every single person managing PTSD, mental health issues. So now let's talk a little bit about Real Housewives of Orange County. I missed a couple episodes with you all. I had guests on. I recently went on Mandy Slutzker's podcast to talk about Real Housewives of Dubai and Real Housewives of Orange County. So please check that out. Her podcast is called Is This Real Life with Mandy Slutzker, and I'm going to be on this week. So I have some thoughts about Orange County, and I'm bringing back the drama triangle, Karpman's drama triangle, because when I was watching, I was like, this is what's happening, this drama triangle. It's so wild. So the first thing that I'm going to say about OC is that I appreciated Emily calling Alexis out on her behaviors towards Shannon. I want to be super clear that what Emily did is very hard to do, and very few people know how to do it well. And what I mean is, she called her out. She used the appropriate language. I forget exactly what she said. It was like, she used very specific words about how terrible it was what Alexis was doing. But her tone and the way that she approached it shows that it's not what you say, it's how you say it. I've had to say a lot of difficult stuff to people. I used to work for an agency that when I was forced, to call Child Protective Services because of X, Y, or Z, that they would make me tell the parent that I had to call. And that was a whole, ooh. So I learned at a young age that it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And the spirit of which it's intended, and the attitude and the nonverbals and all of that. So Emily truly is one of my favorite housewives for that reason. I just think she's super real. I think she does call people out on their stuff, which is a true good friend, a true good person. And she also takes a lot of accountability towards her stuff. She's like, yeah, I was mean to Jen. Emily talked about all this childhood trauma, and how for Emily, and by the way, I talked about this in a previous episode. And so that I knew that Emily was projecting onto Jen, but what we found out in this episode is that, Emily was someone who wasn't taken care of as a child. There was neglect, there was abuse, there was a lot of lack of love, there was a lot of that. And so when you see someone like Jen, who's been kind of babied and loved and just treated well and has people to have her back, what Emily was really feeling was grief, and anger, and maybe some jealousy and resentment, that it's hard for people like Emily and like me to look at people like Jen and to not feel some sort of grief of like, why didn't I get that? Or, I would have loved this help too. And so I spotted that with Emily weeks and weeks ago. So she was able to talk about that. But what I love about Emily is that she owned her stuff. She was like, yeah, my childhood was hard and I didn't get this, and it's hard for me to see this. And she apologized to Jen, and she was like, what I was doing was not okay. I was being an asshole, and I'm sorry. And that is, Emily to me is the best a person can get in terms of just like being real, being authentic, not being perfect, but also owning her shit. I think I stan Emily. I'm pretty sure. pretty sure I do. I don't know. I just love her. And then, of course, Alexis continues to use immature rationalizations for her behaviors, which to me shows a significant lack of understanding about her role in this drama triangle. Like, Alexis continues to make statements that directly conflict with her behaviors, which that for me is I get really annoyed by that. When someone is saying, well, I want to be friends with you, and then continues to do X, Y, and Z, it's the behavior that tells the true story. If people say anything, and let me be honest, and I know I'm a little jaded, but everybody lies. Trust me, everybody lies. And believe what people do, not what they say, is what I'm saying. And Alexis and John, to me, are two examples of they're just completely inauthentic, incongruent. They're saying one thing, they're doing another. And that if that bothers you, congratulations. That's a healthy response. That's a healthy response for that to bother you, because it's nonsense and it's not okay. So, for example, Alexis saying, well, I don't want to kick someone while they're down. She literally said that on OC. And then goes on Watch What Happens Live afterwards and claims that Shannon did almost run over John's daughter the night of her DUI. This tells me that Alexis lacks complete awareness, authenticity, and doesn't mean what she says. Because that's a doubling down that is extraordinarily dangerous, okay? So she and Johnny J went on Watch What Happens Live after OC. And Andy confronted the two about their contradictory behaviors. So I want to share a little bit about what they had to say about that. So Andy asked, so for those who didn't see it or didn't hear about it by now, because I've talked about it on my Instagram and things like that. But so on Watch What Happens Live, Andy asked Johnny J, who was in the audience and probably got more screen time than like Katie. And I was like, why? Why are we doing this? We don't. Get this man off my screen. Please get this man off my screen after what he is doing to Shannon. Give me a break. So Andy asked Johnny J about Shannon's claims that he refused to sign a non-disparagement agreement. This is literally what John said. And by the way, I was trying to get direct quotes, but he talks in such a bizarre, meandering, doesn't talk in complete sentences. It was hard to even get a quote, which also to me is a red flag. But this is what he said. Because I have been disparaged for almost 5 years, and why would I put a legal muzzle on myself so that I can't actually correct the record? Sir, 5 years or 5 minutes? What are you talking about? That he's been disparaged for 5 years. I'm so confused about that. And also, so my thought was that, well, then how have you been disparaged? And Andy actually literally asked the same question. And I was like, oh, yay. So he says, what's the biggest way you've been disparaged? This is what John has to say. I don't want to get into those details, but she pays for everything and she's my sugar mama. That was far from the truth and was damaging to me. I fat shamed her. That couldn't be further from the truth. So these are your gripes. This is what you're saying. You won't sign this non-disparagement agreement because of this? That doesn't make any sense to me. And if I'm being honest, that's complete nonsense. And here's the thing. So speaking of the financial stuff, and this is what's so bizarre to me, Andy then addressed John's past complaints of like wanting privacy and Shannon being too public. And now all of a sudden, like he and Alexis are making red carpet debuts. And so I will give it to Andy. Sometimes he is really soft on people, especially people that he likes, but he did ask the hard questions. And then this is what Alexis said. And I swear I was the emoji of like my brain exploding. That was me. He didn't want me to do the show. He offered to pay my salary if I didn't do the show. Then he offered to double it if I didn't. And let me just be super clear about this. This is weird. This is weird. If this is real, that's a weird offer. It's insulting. It's like, why do we think that this makes John look any better? It's insulting to Alexis, but Alexis is too, what's the word I should use? Naive to see what's going on here. She's too naive to understand that like Alexis has this pattern of being with men, being their ride or die, getting herself in all sorts of trouble, but doing it in the name of he's my man. And I'm just like, Alexis, you have to grow up. I'm sorry, you're developmentally stunted. I don't understand what's happening here. A man should not be your entire life. You should not be going to bat for some terrible men. Like, why are you doing this? She did this with Jim Bellino. And then remember, by the way, guys, she was engaged to some guy before she even met Johnny J that she said saved her and he was a Christian. Like, it's the same stuff, different guy. And so for me, it's not even about John. It's like Alexis is a huge part of this problem too, where it's like, stop with this blaming other people. You do not understand how you are the architect of your own demise when you get into relationships with these men. She just doesn't. And then she went on to say, like, Andy asked her if she regretted any of the stuff that she did. And so, of course, she was like, nah. But then she was like, I regret what's being shown of me. If they would have seen more of what was filmed, I would be more multifaceted. And so here's the sad fact of the matter is that Alexis lost her mother right before filming. And as we saw with the family equality event, which I can't wait to talk about, I so love Heather Dubrow, family equality. I love everything about what they were doing this episode. But Alexis is invested in LGBTQIA plus advocacy because she has a trans child. And so I think we would have all loved to see that other side of her as well. So it's the case of two things can be true, right? Is that a little birdie told me that for some Housewives franchises, there is one story editor, one singular person. And so here's the problem with that psychologically is that as a person, I have my own biases, lenses that I see the world through, right? And that's not always right. It's just my perspective. So when you have one human being who's in charge of getting a storyline, who clearly doesn't like Alexis or whatever that may be, I do think that there can be problems there. And this is why we see really biased storylines. And I do think that there's some stuff being left out. However, you can't Franken edit what Alexis doesn't say or do. So the fact is that she is incessantly talking about Johnny J and this and clearly trying to get to Shannon. She's clearly trying to get to Shannon. And that couldn't be any more clear. So it's like, again, two things can be true. I think that she may be more multifaceted. I'm not saying Alexis is a terrible person, but I am saying that she's behaving in a manner that is just making her look bad, and that is her own fault. That for sure is her own fault. So John and Alexis make claims, then completely contradict said claims and behaviors that follow. So for example, John saying, well, let's not talk about it, but please also let me talk about it. It just gave me a whiplash. And I was just like, you two need to make up your minds. On a recent podcast, Alexis is walking back claims that John had anything to do with threatening to release the allegedly damaging videos of Shannon. However, on Watch What Happens Live, after the OC episode, Alexis confirmed previous claims that Shannon almost ran over John's daughter. And I'm like, the two of them, they sincerely cannot keep their story straight or take any accountability in their role in this drama triangle. And so let me talk a little bit about the drama triangle. I posted a reel about it. I have it on my Instagram, Your Bish Therapist. So I kind of made my own meme. But so essentially what's happening is that John and Alexis are putting Shannon in a victim role. And the thing is, I think Shannon is trying to take accountability. I still, don't get me wrong, I still think Shannon has a ton of denial and minimization. She makes a lot of excuses for her drinking. She makes a lot of rationalizations. It's like, oh, well, I'm on vacation, so I can have a drink. And I'm on, whatever, so I can do this. And it's like, I understand that Shannon's doing that because she knows people are judging her. And as I've talked about before, there's something called harm reduction, is that some people who have overutilized substances, they struggle to say, well, this is not, I can't stop doing this completely. And again, so I can't go into all the nuances of this because I don't have time right now, but I did an episode where I talked about harm reduction, and it's a perfectly legitimate method because while Tamra and everyone else clearly feels like Shannon has a problem with alcohol, Shannon needs to know what's going on for her. And the only people who really know that is Shannon and her therapist, practitioner, provider, whatever you want to call it. Whoever she's seeing to help her with this, the only two people that really know what's going on are them. But I can say that I think she's making these rationalizations to try to appease people because everyone's saying you're an alcoholic, why are you drinking? And then she's drinking. But Shannon has every right to, she doesn't have every right to drink and drive. Nobody does. That's nope, never, ever, ever. Or smoke and drive, use a substance and drive, driving while under the influence of pain medications, marijuana, whatever it is, not acceptable. Okay. But this is her path. And Tamara can't bully her into being sober. Sobriety is a long and winding road. It's hilly, it's bumpy. And so, I've seen people who have had vast success with sobriety, and I've seen people who struggled with it, and harm reduction was the best method for them. So I just want to say that. But the problem is all these people, Tamara and Vicky, are putting Shannon in a victim role. And now John and Alexis are also putting her in a victim role. So the persecutor with a triangle, so picture a triangle, and then you have on one corner a persecutor, the other corner the rescuer, and then the bottom is the victim. And so John is acting as the persecutor. In this mode, the person doesn't value other people's views and integrity. The person can be angry, aggressive, judgmental, bullying, demanding, spiteful, and scornful. So that's where John is at right now. He's the persecutor. The rescuer, believe it or not, is Alexis. In this mode, the person doesn't value other people's capacity to help themselves. And that's where I think a lot of this behavior comes from with Alexis. She's like, oh, he's my man, so let me fight his battles. And it's like, you're just putting yourself in this drama triangle. So the rescuer often appears self-sacrificing, check, over-helpful and facilitative, like to be needed, prone to meddling unnecessarily, check, 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 and engulfing. So there's definitely an enmeshment going on between John and Alexis. Alexis needs to learn to let her men fight their own battles and to not be a mouthpiece, because Alexis would probably benefit from focusing more on herself than others. And listen, maybe that's why she does this. We all do things. Sometimes we want to distract from our own lives, but, I hate to say it, but it's just not healthy. And then this puts Shannon in the victim spot again, which is, in this mode, the person doesn't value self and defers to others. So it's like, poor me, helpless and needy, fretful, downtrodden, and blaming others. And so, unfortunately, what this does is it puts all of them in a bad spot, because it puts Shannon in a victim spot and she's trying to take accountability. But when you have these two that are just like, I've just had people reach out to me and they're like, what you do with this triangle stuff is brilliant. Like other professionals, because they're like, it's such a good teaching tool. So that's the best thing I can say, is that the psychology of what I'm saying is sound. And this is my opinion of what's happening. And I hope it makes sense to you all. And again, you can look your Bish therapist for, examples of that and what that looks like and stuff like that. So my friends, this is going to be the end of the episode for me. This has been so wonderful to just talk with you and to share my experience, strength, and hope and all of that. So don't fret. I will be doing more solo episodes. In fact, I don't have many other interviews scheduled right now. That doesn't mean I won't schedule them, but I will be actively doing more one-on-one. I am, I am going to cover the secret lives of Mormon wives. Because here's what I want to say for the loyal listeners who listen to this podcast. There are some times where I'll talk about at the beginning of an ep or season that I'm going to cover this, and then I end up not covering it. And so for me, I just, I want to acknowledge that and apologize in terms of if it bothers people. But what happens is, for me with my creativity, it's best for me to just do what authentically seems interesting for me. So for example, I have tons of notes on Gypsy Rose, Life After Lockup, but now I'm like, is that pertinent? Does anybody want to hear about it? I feel like people are sick of her. And so I don't want to force that if people aren't into it. And so Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, people have been sincerely begging me for my feedback. And plus I'm actually just curious, because I don't ever just watch something because people want me to watch it. I have to have an authentic interest. Otherwise, my creativity process suffers. And so, not to make myself sound like a tortured artist, but you get it. So I'm definitely going to cover that. And if people, here's the thing, I want to hear from you. Do you still want to hear about Gypsy Rose? I also have notes on The Curious Case of Natalia Grace that I never did, because again, I just feel like that other things came up and I never did it. And I think there was something, I said I was going to cover $1 Million Listing Los Angeles, but then I'm like, I feel like it hasn't been super interesting. I feel like it's kind of very scripted, number one. And number two, Real Housewives of Salt Lake City is coming back. Real Housewives of New York is coming back. There's just a lot of stuff to cover. And so I don't know. I think I might skip those. But if people really want to hear it, let me know and I will do my very best. So coming up will be New York, Salt Lake City, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, and TBD. But I'm just excited to see what comes to my brain and bring it all to you. And, for everyone listening to this, that something that I've said has resonated, just know I send you lots of love and support. This community has your back. I have your back. We all have each other's backs. And I'm just really grateful for you all. So please take care of yourselves and each other. And ta-ta for now. Until next time. Disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.